Hi, this is Eva for Once Upon a Timeline, and it gets even wilder than before because today we're going to talk about all female races of animals, as well as the fact that now the females determine the sex of their offspring, and that is even in humans. Yes, it's getting stranger and stranger. Okay, so let's start with these sperm-stealing Prussian carp that are overwhelming Alberta waterways, according to this article. They're here, they're having negative impacts, and they could actually overwhelm the system. And one of the reasons these fish can overwhelm the system is because they don't need male of their own species to reproduce. They can easily reproduce asexually. The females just clone themselves, so they don't need any males. And these are a big fish. They're described as dinner plate sized and looking like goldfish. Schools of Prussian carp, a sperm-stealing fish capable of cloning itself, are invading Alberta waterways, says an Edmonton researcher. This might be a little shocking, but males are not actually needed for reproduction for this species. The females lay the eggs and actually take sperm from another species, so another species will fertilize the eggs, but they won't actually contribute any genetic material. So that's pretty weird. So part of the complaint is that they can reproduce very quickly, and also that they might be stealing sperm from other native species. One thing they don't describe is how these fish convince other species to fertilize their eggs. I don't know if fish are just stupid or what, but anyways, very weird. And this one is even more weird because this species here, this molly, supposedly does not even have any males of their kind anymore. They just reproduce by cloning only. Girl power, life's going swimmingly well for all female fish species. An all-female freshwater fish species called the Amazon molly that inhabits rivers and creeks along the Texas-Mexico border is living proof that sexual reproduction may be vastly overrated. Scientists said on Monday they have deciphered the genome of the Amazon molly, one of the few vertebrate species to rely upon asexual reproduction, and discovered that it had none of the genetic flaws, such as accumulation of harmful mutations or a lack of genetic diversity, that they had expected. So this is a completely healthy species. The Amazon molly female produces clones of itself by duping a male of the closely related species to mate with her. And again, the male does not end up contributing any genetic material. This style of reproduction is called gynogenesis. I think we're going to be hearing a lot about that word in the future. Requires a female to mate with a male, but none of the male's genome is passed to the offspring. The Amazon male's eggs or cells are activated to develop into an embryo, but a sperm cell that generates without fusing with the egg's nucleus. So the sperm cell just triggers the embryo, but does not actually donate any of its material. This is an interesting one because this is how it used to be for me. It was long thought that vertebrates would not be able to exist in such a way. Okay, yes, that's what I was always taught, that there is no way that they could survive long term because they needed the constant mixing and changing of the DNA in order to be a flexible species and adapt to changes. But here's what it's weird because it says, it was a sensation when the Amazon molly was the first asexual vertebrate discovered in 1932, Chartla said. So apparently in this timeline, this creature was known since 1932, and I've already shown there are other creatures that do it. So now the storyline is about 50 vertebrates are known to use asexual reproduction, including fish, amphibians, and reptiles. So this thing's really spreading, guys. I'm afraid that we may not need you anymore at this rate. Very weird. I first heard about the parthenogenesis, where some snakes were reproducing asexually, maybe about 6 years ago, maybe a tad more, and it was considered a very unusual, weird thing. They weren't sure if it was really happening, but they had some zoo animals that had not had any contact with males for decades, and yet they managed to reproduce. And they had even thought that maybe the female snake was doing some kind of sperm saving thing. They totally did not accept even the parthenogenesis concept at first. It was very, very untrusted concept. But now we've had all these creatures since 1932 and that do it. So that would have never been the case in this timeline. Okay, so it gets stranger because they're saying mammals now can determine the sex of their offspring, and it's the female decides. So I think that you all probably remember what I always learned was that the male determines the sex of the offspring. The female is the XX chromosomes. The males are the XY chromosome. And if the male contributes an X chromosome, you have a female. If the male contributes a Y chromosome, you have a male. And it was basically by chance, 50-50. But then there was a slight discrepancy, and they said, well, maybe the sperm have a slight advantage. One of them is a little stronger than the other. And then you started hearing about these temperature determines. That was kind of a weird one, but it was like in alligators and stuff. Some of the egg-laying animals, they said, oh, the temperature determines if it's a male or female. And I really should have studied that more because I'm wondering how does the chromosomes change just by temperature? That's weird. I mean, shouldn't it have been determined when the egg was laid? Anyway, so this stuff's getting weirder and weirder. So let's look at it in humans now. So a new study shows that mammalian species can choose the sex of their offspring in order to beat the odds and produce extra grandchildren. So the hypothesis was reinforced in 1984 in a seminal Nature paper by T.H. Clutton-Brock at the University of Cambridge, who found that among wild red deer, dominant mothers produce significantly more sons than deer who held a subordinate position. So what we're saying now is that if a female is in a good position and strong and healthy, they will often produce a bunch of males. But if they are in a more subordinate, a weaker, or food-deprived position, they will produce a bunch of females. Now, the argument could be that it has to do with food availability affecting fertility, but some of these studies, they just show that it's your pecking order and things like that, even though food is highly available. So what they're pushing now is that it's just that the female chooses. Here's an example of it in humans. For instance, in polygamous societies, the top-ranking wife is much more likely to have a son than the lower-ranking wife. The son holds the economic power in the family. In a study of 400 U.S. billionaires published in 2013, found that they were more likely to have sons than daughters. Presumably, the scientists hypothesized because sons tend to retain the family's wealth. Okay, so very interesting. Never heard of anything like that, but apparently it's been around quite a long time in this timeline. I actually did just a quick Google to just check dates, and in 2013 looks like the magic number in this timeline for when this information kind of hit the airwaves a lot. Although there are research going back further, it looks like in 2013 a bunch of articles came out. And I am positive that in my timeline they were not there, because ever since the Mandela Effect, I found out about it a couple years ago, I've been really, really looking into this stuff. And there was none of this out there back then in like 2 years ago. None, not to mention 2013. So very, very weird. There are so many weird things with reproduction going on right now. I think that we may even see more, and I think that it's going to be very shocking. This is Eva signing off for Once Upon a Timeline.